Welcome back to the Sunday Serving channel, where you come every week for words of hope and truth and light from the gospel. And today we're coming with the last section of the Sermon on the Mount, that wonderful teaching of Jesus, so central to following Jesus, to being disciples. The 5th, 6th, 7th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, also found in the other Gospels. It's a wonderful completion to these teachings we've been thinking about in these last series. So here it is, Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 7. Here we go, starting with verse 21. And this part is a challenge about not just speaking the language, but actually doing it. Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven." So again, it comes down to doing things, to following the word, even the hard teachings, to following it, to being obedient. "Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Get away from me, you evildoers.'" Those are serious words. And then Jesus goes on with this about the builders. I love this, about a rock foundation. And this comes right at the end of all those teachings of the Sermon on the Mount. He says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice." So this is positive. If you hear what I'm saying, Jesus is saying, and you put it into practice, it's like a wise man who built his house on the rock. So like this rock we see here, solid rock, it doesn't shift in the storm. That's where to build. We need a rock to build our lives on. Jesus said, if you do my words, not just speak about them, not just hear them, not just think about them, philosophize about them, interpret them, but if you hear them and do them, that's the key word, do them, you're like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew, and they beat against the house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. So let's take that to heart. Let's put our foundation on the rock of Jesus by doing his word. And he goes on, "But if anyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." So if we build on sand, things that shift, not being true, not being sincere, if we don't do the words of Jesus, if we don't follow him truly, it's like building on sand. We'd have no foundation. When difficult times come, storms, wind, rain, our foundation will crack, will break, and the house will fall. And that was the last teaching in this Sermon on the Mount. Imagine Jesus up on the hill. The disciples had come first and sat down, and then crowds came and gathered, and he gave all these teachings. And it's a whole, we think back to all the things we've covered in these various Sunday servings, starting with the Beatitudes, right? The blesseds are the peacemakers, poor in spirit, the meek, the merciful, those who mourn. Then the teachings about salt and light, about law and righteousness, about anger and murder, about adultery and lust, about divorce, about letting our yes be yes and not swearing oaths, about not wanting revenge, but actually turning our other cheek if someone slaps us. Imagine following that teaching. That's one of these teachings. Jesus said, don't just listen to them, do them if you want a rock foundation. About giving to the needy, about love to enemies, about prayer, fasting, treasures in heaven, not worrying, asking for what we need, not judging, looking, seeking, knocking, asking, about the wide and the narrow gate, the true and the false prophets and the true and the false disciples, and then finally about doing all these things so that the spiritual foundation of our lives is a rock. And I think that's a lot to ponder on, is what is our rock foundation? What are we going to build our houses on? The houses rise up in the air, right? They should be seen, they should be useful, but the feet has to rest on something solid, the word of Jesus, his ways. So let's take that to heart. Let's make Jesus' word our rock. God bless you all. Have a wonderful week.